A little sidebar, if I may, and I hope you guys will appreciate this, and I kind of think you will. So, everybody remembers the firing of Comey and then the replacement of Comey by Christopher Wray by Donald Trump. And Donald Trump, for whatever reason, thought that he was going to basically install a Roy Cohn everywhere. That was his gig. That's what he was going to do. He's just going to find sycophants, and he's been talking about it more that's what he directly plans to do. Whereas before he would think it but not say it. Now he's just saying it. But even then, he was still trying to do it. He was under the impression that whoever the people around him, whether it was Stephen Miller or Bannon or anybody, like they told him, yeah, get this guy in there. It wasn't because they'll be good for the country. It's because they'd be good for him. And so the idea was that Christopher Wray was going to be Trump's sycophant. And he hasn't been at all. Now, has he been a good head of the FBI? Better than Comey, rather? No. I wouldn't. It's kind of a wash, honestly. Those kind of guys, those kind of career FBI guys, all are kind of a bit cookie cutter. Their ideology brings them, from a very specific track. It's like military guys, you know what I mean? You very seldomly, like Mike Flynn is an odd duck in that he's a fucked up psycho general. Most of them they weed them out around the 2-star level, and they're like, all right, this guy's a dipshit. It is debatable, Gen X George, by the way, whether he's, like the difference between Wray and Comey, but not a huge amount, right? We're not seeing stuff, and we're certainly not seeing Chris Wray, hamstringing the Jan 6 prosecutions or any of that shit. And he certainly hasn't been, on the forefront of pushing to get Trump or some nonsense. He certainly didn't like turn on Trump the way Trump thinks he did, and he certainly didn't, soft pedal stuff the way some people were concerned, right? I would argue. So, but you wouldn't know that if you looked at how the Republicans are responding. Let me show you, this is Mike Lee. Mike Lee was very proud of himself for how he went after Chris Wray. I want to, let's just see if we can see what these assholes are on about.
Thanks, Senator Coons. Senator Lee.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Director Wray, for being here.
By the way, I get the distinct feeling from his tweets anyways that he doesn't mean that.
Report issued, declassified in August of 2021, the Director of National Intelligence stated, quote, FBI personnel conducted multiple queries of an individual who had the same last name as the FBI personnel conducting the query. And on further investigation, what they learned was that this query was made after this analyst at the FBI had a conversation with his own mother, and his mother expressed suspicions about his father having an affair, cheating on her, having an affair with another woman. And so as a result of that...
By the way, I know what you're saying. I would say we should set all the Jan 6ers free, because clearly...
They looked into it, and this particular analyst admitted that he ran the queries because of this tip from his mother that his dad was having an affair.
And he was just seeing if his father had his dad had any convictions for, for legally, he had a parking ticket in front of the house of the chick he was fucking. Is that the idea?
Because I've got a lot of...
Like it was a second-degree adultery conviction in Florida under a different name?
Material to cover. I'd appreciate if you could give me a yes or no answer to this. Was that analyst terminated?
Yes. I have a organization that's got like 36,000 people in it, and who?
I'm not sure that I can recall the specific instance that you're talking about, so I'll have to go look at that and follow back up with you on that.
I know that, Mike Lee, I recognize, Senator, that you, being a lunatic, will pick random stories that you fixate on, and then somehow, and this seems to be ubiquitous across your entire caucus these days, you seem to think that whatever news stories you fixate on like a psychopath is the general knowledge news that everyone else is paying attention to, even though from a legal and intellectual and political standpoint, it's like a needle in a haystack. But you're just like, look at the pile of needles. and most of your colleagues don't even know what the fuck you're talking about. So I'll look it up.
And do you know whether the analyst's security clearance would have been revoked?
And this is where he gets to do the would have been revoked.
Again, say
There's a process, I suppose. One would guess that if he was found guilty of this or whatever, he would either be reprimanded or found guilty.
answer, but let me check into that, and we'll circle back to
Let me ask
whatever
you-
we can share.
Let me ask it to you this way, yes or no?
Let me ask you you this way.
Would abuse of Section 702 by an FBI employee, would that be something that would warrant the revocation of security clearance?
Kind of depends. I'll give you an example. Guy looks up stuff on his dad because his mom thinks dad has been cheating, which is a violation of that thing. Guy also has the best record at catching serial killers and domestic terrorists in his entire section. For whatever it's worth, this dude is just wired that way. And we have a choice. We can totally eliminate him from the process because his mom asked this thing and he made the thing. We get a normal thing, by the way, we would reprimand other people for. Or we could take your advice and ditch this fucking dude and let the 3 serial killers he's hot on the trail of skate. Or money launderers, drug and gun runners, fentanyl fucking sales operations. We'll let those fucking slide because you've picked this out as an example of, because this happened, the entirety of the FBI is just to run amok with all these things. And by the way, if they had, of course, you wouldn't even fucking know about this.
Well, certainly abuse. I think we'd have to know what the circumstances were.
Misuse.
Sometimes people have used terms like abuse in this discussion when it's been something other than what I would call abuse, but that's why we have this accountability procedures that have cascading
This example that I've
consequences.
given you is abuse. I assume you would not disagree with that. Now,
Well, it's a misuse. Abuse, I don't know. If he found out his dad was fucking somebody else because his mom asked about it, and then he retasked a satellite to find him, and then he popped him like Osama bin Laden or fucking sent a SWAT team out with a false gun report. That would move, I think, swiftly into the zone of abuse. This would be misuse. Reprimand, don't do it again, lesson learned.
September of 2023, Peak
Whoa, September 23. Okay, this is just recent. This is hot.
Club report disclosed 2 additional intentional incidents.
2 additional intentional incidents.
Intentional wrong searches from 2022. One incident
Intentional wrong searches. I hope that's what they're called. That legally, hashtag intentional wrong searches.
from 2022 in which 2 analysts conducted queries seeking information about a person who was a potential tenant of a rental property owned by one of the analysts. And another instance from
Oh, so they ran a background check instead of hiring a background check company because they have the machine that does background checks in front. So they ran a query on this dude instead of paying for it, which is what you'd have to do because they're sitting there in front of the computer.
2022 in which an NSA analyst conducted
By the way, that person, I'll have you know, the tenant never got the apartment and was picked up by a black helicopter, flown to Guantanamo, and is still in a stress position to this day. Now, would we call that abuse? I don't know.
queries on 2 occasions seeking information about 2 individuals that the analyst himself had met through an online dating service. Were the FBI employees who conducted those 2 illegal searches, were they terminated?
Well, those wouldn't be illegal searches necessarily unless they faked a warrant or something like that. I mean, if they just looked them up, again, that would be misuse, not abuse.
Well, you lost me there for a minute. You referred to an NSA analyst?
Yeah, we're running into the other thing, too, where these assholes don't even know what organization he works for.
Yeah.
Yeah, NSA, the people at NSA where you don't work or do shit. Have you fired those people that you don't have the ability to fire? Or even hired them after they were fired by someone that does have the capacity to fire them? Fuck.
So, NSA analysts, do you know whether anyone at the NSA
No, he would not know. The National Security Agency is not going to share fucking HR. Maybe they had lunch. Maybe you know what? I take it back. Maybe Chris Wray and the head of the NSA occasionally have a lunch and then they just bitch about employee problems like any other boss.
Was disciplined for that. And if they worked at the FBI, would they be subject to discipline?
You bet they would. Little leather pants and a whoosh. That kind of discipline. Very kinky.
Well, I don't want to get into hypotheticals, but as far as NSA analysts, I think that would be a question for NSA.
Now, were FBI employees
Which is basically, if you don't speak Chris Wray, that's him calling you a dumbass.
involved in those? And if they had been, would there...
If this did happen the way I said, and there was no mitigating circumstances, and I'm portraying it exactly how it happened, and the people that did it had a history or were somehow below the standard for everyone else's HR level as far as investigation to it, we're not summarily fired on the spot, I think, something like that, or
security clearances have been terminated?
Again, I don't want to get into hypotheticals, but we have both the disciplinary process.
yeah, which would be the use versus abuse part. By the way, I would like you to enjoy how angry Mike Lee gets in just a moment. Now, Mike Lee doesn't get angry because of something that necessarily he says or can't say. He gets mad because Mike Lee is dumb, and I think it's just him lashing out from a brain cramp.
Which is separate from the security clearance process, and somebody who who engages in a compliance violation related to 702 could be relevant to both.
I understand. Yeah. I would hope that the default answer would be yes, they'd be subject to having their security clearance stripped.
They are subject to it. But they have to go through the disciplinary process, and he doesn't know where that is in this because you're just fucking pulling this out of your ass. And in some cases, they don't even fucking work at the FBI.
And be subject to dismissal. Now, in an April 2022 opinion, the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court noted the following searches of Americans' communications. 19,000 donors to a particular congressional campaign, 133 Americans participating in civil unrest and protests in the summer of 2020, and Americans who were in the vicinity of the Capitol, not necessarily inside the Capitol, but in the vicinity of the Capitol on January 6, 2021. The DNI's semi-annual assessment of Section 702 disclosed illegal queries conducted in 2019 to 2020, quote, using only the name of a U.S. congressman. The FISA court disclosed two particularly egregious searches from
Uh-oh, we're getting into Marjorie Taylor Greene zone. Also, by the way, the idea that you were like, they did a search query on somebody who wasn't in the Capitol but was in the area. I got news for you. These motherfuckers were communicating to people who were outside the Capitol once they were inside, multiple times. Some of them via Facebook Messenger. Some of them they were just fucking FaceTiming with. Of course there's going to be a query. The minute if you're in the fucking Capitol and you contact someone, or you had already texted them that day and they're doing a scan on your phone, they're going to go, does this motherfucker have backup? And they're going to check the last 3 people they were in contact with in the last 48 hours in the area just to ping where the fuck they are, if they have that ability at all. So if on a day where 3,000 to 5,000 people stormed the fucking Capitol and 100,000 showed up, that number surprises people, especially when it was like the same query on this, multiple queries on the same phone.
In June of 2022, an analyst conducted 4 queries of 702 information using the last names of a U.S. senator and of a state senator without further limitation. On October 25th, 2022, a staff's operations specialist ran a query using the Social Security number of a state judge who had, quote, complained to FBI about alleged civil rights violations perpetrated by a municipal chief of police.
Which sounds rather Trumpy, I'm just going to say. Let me guess. Biden appointee, the judge, and the person in the FBI, Biden, big Trump fan. Yeah, that's the kind of thing the Biden administration would really instruct the fucking FBI to do, is go after people who are helping people with their civil rights. It's totally on brand.
Close quote. Were the FBI employees who conducted those illegal searches terminated, or did they have their security clearances stripped? Yes or no?
Again, don't know that I can speak to specific instances, but what I can tell you, and I think this is important to this exchange, is that all of the instances you just listed off all involve conduct that occurred before the reforms that we've put in place.
Before the reforms you put in place, reforms, the text of which we don't even have access to, reforms that you've put in place. I've been on this committee.
By the way, again, I don't know why the text part of it is like, this is just weird bullshit, but they've drafted and expressed what the reforms are to the committee multiple times internally. The idea is that there's not some sort of like OSHA thing that they stick up at the fucking door like, these are the new conduct rules per post-Trump, current Biden, whatever.
For 13 years.
Hold on. Wait, what?
Reforms that you've put in place. I've been on this committee for 13 years. During the entirety of those 13 years, I've expressed concerns to FBI directors appointed by presidents of both political parties and 3 different presidential administrations. Every darn one of them has told me the same thing. Don't worry about it. We've got this taken care of. We've got new procedures. It's going to be different now.
No, they haven't. And by the way, if they were, it was about different shit. Also, how is anyone else Wray's fault? For real. They just implemented these things in the last year. That's his point.
Never different. You haven't changed.
Yes, Cristopher Wray, you have not changed since you were Comey or his predecessor.
And you keep referring to these policies, these new procedures. We haven't seen that. We're not even allowed
I've been here. You've been sitting here for 13 years telling me the same bullshit.
to have access to it. And we have absolutely no reason to trust you because you haven't behaved in a manner that's trustworthy.
Well, and also he was appointed by Donald Trump, so I think that would be the reason.
You can't even, as we sit here, tell me that people who intentionally, knowingly, deliberately violated the civil rights of American citizens,
Debatable.
that they were fired or that they had their security clearance stripped.
Because again, if they, let's say this one of these people made a query, but it was not a query that was outside available information, if you paid for a background check someplace, that they just, what they basically did was get access to that stuff for free, but didn't violate their civil rights. The same thing. If you have a tenant or you checked up on your dad, you could buy one of those queries from someplace.
Now, in 2022, FBI and other agencies searched Americans' communications over 200,000 times.
There are 340 million of us.
Only 16 of which were evidence of a crime-only searches.
Were evidence of a crime only searches. So some of them were evidence of a crime plus?
That returned information. I'd like to ask you to give a yes or a no answer to these questions. Were the 3 related batch queries consisting of over 23,000 separate queries relating to the events of January 6th, were those evidence of a crime only queries, yes or no?
I don't know the answer to that.
The answer is no. I do know the answer. The answer is no. Were there 141 queries for the activists arrested in connection with the George Floyd protests here in Washington, D.C., evidence of a crime-only queries?
Those were non-compliant queries, and again, they all predate the reforms that we've put in place, which
echo other reforms that other FBI directors have told me about every darn year.
If I may.
You cannot lie to me the way they always leave. You always leave. He's getting very dangerously close to the Glenn Close boiling a rabbit reflex.
19,000 donors to a political campaign. The answer there is no. What about the query for a sitting member of Congress?
Well, again, what if it was like a fraudulent campaign? That was the idea, was that because some of them you might contact because they're a witness. Some people you might contact because they were defrauded. Others you might contact through that query because they were willing participants in a money laundering scheme.
The answer there is no.
So you don't know who's who until you actually investigate it.
What about the query involving you, U.S. Senator, which for all we know could be any one of us?
Yeah, it's probably you. You seem testy. I'm going to guess it's you or Ted Cruz.
The answer is no. And so what does that tell me? Well, what I'm
tells me that you're still mad at James Comey.
Hearing, and what these data points all point to is that a warrant requirement or prohibition relating to quote-unquote evidence of a crime-only queries would not have been something that would have prevented any of the most egregious examples of the abuse that we've seen under Section 702. So
I made notes here.
the FBI is
It's making me mad.
already required to obtain a court order in some circumstances
In some.
before
So not all.
accessing the contents of Americans' communications in the context of 702. They're already required for that in some circumstances.
In some. So they're not required to get a court order in other areas of 702. So that's why there are broad abilities within it, within whatever guidelines they have, are based on the judgment of the people involved. So you can have bad judgment and good. This is not, I don't even know why the fuck he's arguing with Chris Wray now. This is a problem for Congress. Redraft 702 if you have a problem, stupid.
Since 2018, how many times has that requirement been triggered, according to government reporting? Do you know?
You talking about the so-called F2?
Yes.
Yeah. How many times has it been triggered?
Yes.
I think there have been 2 instances where I think is maybe the number.
103 times it's been triggered. And out of those 103 identified times, the FBI should have obtained a court order. How many times did the FBI actually obtain one? Do you know?
That, I think the answer is none.
0. So you're telling me that the FBI has completely ignored the limited court order requirement that it's already subjected to. You have the audacity to come here, and you told us
Yeah, some of this, by the way, I would like to remind you, predates Ray's time, I think.
that adding a warrant requirement to 702, even for queries involving U.S. persons on U.S. soil, that would amount to some sort of unilateral disarmament.
Oh, okay. So in the 13,000 plus or whatever, and in these other batches, we're not even talking about American sources. We're talking about foreigners on American soil or engaging in business in the United States from overseas.
You have a lot of gall, sir.
Yes, you do, Mr. Comey. I mean,
This is disgraceful.
it is.
The Fourth Amendment requires more than that, and you know it. I know every single time for centuries, even prior to the founding of this country.
Do you?
There's similar protections built into the laws of the United Kingdom before we became a country.
No.
Even then, the government was making the same darn argument you're making today.
No, they aren't. Under King George, there were no limits on privacy of citizens and what the ever-loving shit?
Which is, it's too hard. This would make it hard for the government.
I don't think the king ever argued that. I don't think most monarchs never argued about how difficult it was to thread the needle between individual rights and privacy protections. What the ever-loving fuck are you talking about? How is this a thing? How are you even saying this out loud?
Why we have a
I mean, obviously, you can tell by the look on his face that he has talked himself into a corner.
Constitution, sir, and you must comply with it.
Mr. Chairman, may I respond briefly? When you ask why are things different this time, I would point you again to the findings of the court and the department themselves, both of which have not been shy about identifying some of the same instances that you cited in our colloquy. They themselves have observed the effectiveness of the reform, which is why the pre versus post.
Which, by the way, Mike Lee and everybody and his staff and Ted Cruz and all these people, they have access to both the court's rulings about the provisions to see if they go far enough or whatever. Like, this is just fucking stupid.
Date of the reforms becomes very.
I mean, the best part is just that Mike Lee somehow thinks that monarchies gave a rat fuck about personal privacy.
Significant. So that's number one. Second, as to your claims about constitutionality, I would point you back to what the case law actually shows on this subject, which is that no court has found 702 in its current form to be unconstitutional, and every court to have looked at it has found it to be constitutional.
Well,
and last point.
How lucky for you, because no one has standing to do that. No
I'm so mad.
one knows when they're
Guys, you don't even know.
being surveilled.
Come on.
Yeah,
Yeah, but that
is not
but what?
an argument, sir.
I don't know.
Last point, Mr. Chairman.
Good Lord.
is that in some of the instances, and you went through a number in your questions, in some of the instances in particular that I know about, those are instances where the queries were run in order to get to a public official, member of Congress, to warn them about foreign influences targeting
Yes,
them. And a
we call
warrant
those
would not have enabled that.
We call those consent searches. And consent searches do not require a warrant, sir, and you know that.
Right.
There is nothing that you have done that is not entirely within the FBI's control and supervision. You're
He is the FBI director. You realize that.
asking me to believe something that is not believable because your agency has made it unbelievable.
I don't even know. This is unbelievable. I don't understand what you even think you mean. It's bad enough when somebody it misreads what someone else is doing. I don't even know what the fuck he's arguing at this point.
And I refuse to accept it.
Well, yes. Well, good, because I just hope that's not in a category with things like gravity. He's so mad. And by the way, this is a thing. I wanted to show you guys as an example of hashtag the best people. And of course, that Cristopher Wray was Donald Trump's personal choice to head up the FBI after he bounced Comey, because if he hadn't, he would have been in jail a long time ago in his own admission or his own thought. And these fucking guys, I guess they were expecting Wray to be a sycophant and about face the FBI, and they're like, nobody trusts the FBI anymore. That's because you trusted him to carry out the whims of Donald Trump, not follow the Constitution. That's why they've lost trust in the FBI. Not because of anything the FBI has done that's different than any other shit the FBI has done. And arguably, by all measures, it's better than it was. It gets better all the time. Most of the time. There's probably some rollbacks around the Patriot Act that were concerning. But since the 60s, I think we've clearly seen that the guardrails have gotten tighter on what the FBI can do and the limitations of it. And because they don't have effectively a material, like a military arm, the U.S. Marshals handle most of it, that the tug and pull between those two organizations really does keep things from getting out over their skis like Waco or Ruby Ridge or something again. Like after the reforms around those things, it's a lot of slow rolls. As a matter of fact, it should arguably move a little faster. Oh my God, just the bitching. It's just fucking embarrassing.